Hi, this is Anto Chávez with Be Latina News. Today we're talking to a Nicaraguan activist, Anaís González, who now lives in Los Angeles, and so we're going to be talking about what's going on politically in Nicaragua, as well as how COVID-19 and especially Hurricane ETA is worsening the situation and the crisis in the country. So I'm excited to see what she has to say and hopefully to get some ways that we can help the Nicaraguan people right now. Let's get started. Hi, Anaís.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, and you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad. Where are you in the world right now?
I'm actually based in LA, so I'm in Los Angeles, California, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so let's jump right in because we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot to
yeah,
unpack.
yeah, a lot to unpack. So first, I would love to have you introduce yourself and just tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Anaís González. I'm a Nicaraguan activist. I received my BA in History and Central American Studies at California State University, Northridge. I've done a lot of grassroots work within the Central American community specifically, and I just dedicate my time and the rest for Nicaragua.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on in Nicaragua, obviously, and that's what we're gonna talk about right now. But first, let's get a little bit of context. What is the political situation right now in the country?
So right now, the political situation, I would define it. It's a dictatorship, right? There is no liberty of expression, no signs of no free and fair elections, if you want to speak it that way. Ortega has been in power. Depends how you want to analyze it. Some people is going to say he's been in power for 40 years. Some people will say he's been in power for the last 12. So and then there's several reasons why he's in power, right? Through PACs, again, no free and fair elections, harassing opposition groups, governing from beneath. So that's kind of like the very simple way to put it, right? Of course, there's more details. Nicaragua is similar. The government of Ortega is similar to that of Maduro. So and so that's where, if people want to compare and contrast, then yes, our governments and our react similar to that of Maduro. Of course, that's our closest ally, and with Cuba as well. So then I don't know. That's the quick overview of what's going on. So the outpress. I specifically started my activism towards Nicaragua by April of 2018. That's when social unrest broke. So what happened during that time was what we call it in Nicaragua fue un movimiento autoconvocado, where it was a self-convoked manner. People just decided over several reasons that occurred during that time, which was the first one, and it was very youth-led. So the April uprising was very youth-led, but at the same time, but prior to April 18, there were already a lot of other movements and that were, organizing, and you saw that as el Movimiento Campesino. So el Movimiento Campesino and the Afro-Indigenous communities have been organizing, right? But of course, it was in el campo, it was outside, it wasn't urban, so the crisis has still not really touched the city. And in April, what you see here was the youth began to be active. So one of the biggest thing that really moved the students and the young people at that time was the burning of Indio Maiz. So the Indio Maiz is one of the most important ecological basins in Central America, and that was being burned in a very rapid manner. what happened here and the discontent that occurred at this time was the neglection of Ortega and his administration in trying to stop the rain. I mean, trying to stop the fire, right? It was literally killing all our equal, anything that has to do with biodiversity was being burned. And intentionally, of course, right? Because of invaders, of colones, selling the logs, whatever you want to name it. So that was really the burn that really ignited the students in the cities, right? This is where you see the capital, Managua. You see the big cities like León and Granada. So this is where it really starts like grabbing momentum. And then from there, and in fact, Ortega denied aid from other countries to help contain that fire. So it was just ongoing. And at that time, we didn't see much going on social media, correct? It was more like, unless you were Nicaraguan, you knew. So what occurred right after that, if that was April, that was the beginning of April. By April 12th, 13, 14, and the day of April 18th, what you see here is Ortega and his administration decide to change social security reforms. So basically what they were doing was, profit off the money, cut off social security reforms too. Mostly what these regimes do is to pay up their political people, right? So that was the first, because it wasn't the first time that Ortega has taken away from the social security reforms. We saw that same similarity back in 2013, I believe. And so that was it. So what happens when he touches the social security reforms? What you see at the moment is you see youth who are already protesting, right? The burning of Indio maize. Then you get all the elderly from Nicaragua, right, who go out in the streets and they demand, for the injustice of the social security reform. So then you have two groups inside the cities who unite, right? And in April 18th, the biggest error that Ortega and his administration did at that moment was they violently repressed the elders and journalists at that time. And since then, there was no turning back. So by April 19th, you had full-on protest in Nicaragua. And this is where the violent repression really, this is where the repression that we have seen already in the campo and in Afro-Indigenous community, this is when it finally hits the urban areas, the cities. Yeah. So Ortega led a violent attack to the cities, to the youth mostly, recorded, right, from international communities. It's about 300 deaths who were shot by paramilitary groups, and they were with arms. So, you had these armed groups shooting at you, and also, like, in Nicaragua, you have the parapolice acting like if it's the military, right? But they have military arms, right? You don't see the military just, with the tanks going on the street, but the police act that way. And then you also have government sympathizers who are paid to create chaos, right? There will be like the colectivos, and what will be in the colectivos in Venezuela. In Nicaragua is the parapolice with government sympathizers. In our case, we call them La Juventud Sandinista. So it's just a delinquent groups, right? That it's sort of sad how you want to put it, because they're paid very little for them to do things, right? So you had armed groups shooting at people with AK-47, with snipers, with top machinery for like war machinery. So and then from there it was protests. Each protest there was assassination. Nicaragua was barricaded for a couple of months, where what we call it tranques, which were you put up tranques. So you put up barricades throughout the city. This was all taken down during Operación Limpieza. So that's when you have the parapolice and the government sympathizers go inside the city and they take down all the barricades and everything. So this is when really it gets really bad, in the sense that this is where we start getting political prisoners. This is where people start leaving Nicaragua. This is where protests are now deemed illegally. This is where nobody could basically it's done. You know, like anything that has to do with going against Ortega, talking about him, posting things on social media. This is Operación Limpieza is that stage where the government illegally and legally, you know, decides that there cannot be no movement at all whatsoever. That is gonna deny. That, you know, that's gonna talk about us, and that's the state that Nicaragua is in right now. So there's no liberty of expression. We currently have about 300 assassinations recorded. International community has deemed Ortega and his administration to commit crimes against humanity, which is similar to the UN report on Venezuela, right? So and what else? So now we have about 100 political prisoners inside, but this is continuing. They'll release and arrest, they'll release and arrest, they'll release and arrest. So the political, that it's ongoing. That doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And we have about more than 10,000 Nicaraguans in exile, majority in Costa Rica, some in United States, and then some in Europe.
Yes. Right. And there's also, so there's a lot going on in terms of, you know, women's rights, reproductive rights as well. There's just, there are so many situations in Nicaragua right now that I'm sure the crisis, COVID, and the hurricane are worsening, right?
Yeah.
So what are other ways besides obviously the blatant violent repression that this regime has had that, you know, Ortega has affected the Nicaraguan people? How, you know, how, if you're someone who does not go and protest ever, how is this government affecting you?
Well, it's really, when you have a sort of government like Ortega, there's really no way for you to be okay. Women have a high femicide rate this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, what Ortega does, instead of releasing political prisoners, he'll release the people who have horrible crimes, like your rapists, and everything. So even you know, there is no way in Nicaragua that you're a woman, and plus you have to deal with no support at all. I mean, at all from the government when it comes to rape, right? And the biggest, you know, the most, and where you see this is the last time that we had a horrible femicide was the killing of two young girls in the coast, and the worst part is that a lot of this happens inside the rural areas of Nicaragua. So it's not spoken about, it's really not heard. So, you know, in Nicaragua, it's done the support that you really have in Nicaragua comes from the people who already oppose Ortega. So it's something very collective, and in general, nobody, not even his own sympathizers, have the great healthcare, if you want to talk about that. And the fact of with the COVID crisis, Ortega, a lot of the people who died of COVID were his closest following. So not even are they protected, right? They're not even themselves are protected from Ortega, even though, you know, they follow him, but not even his closest people are protected in a way, because the COVID crisis showed that a lot of the people who died were his closest allies, you know, people in top position like police officers, you know, los gobernadores de los municipios. So it affects, this crisis affects everyone, and another thing is that even people who are studying, or students who are studying and trying to get the degrees, what is the future that they have in Nicaragua unless they really, the only future you have in Nicaragua is you support the regime,
right?
So it's really a social, political, economic wise too, you know. What is the I don't have the stats, but Nicaragua is already the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. So you could only imagine that it being the poorest country in the hemisphere. We don't have control of our COVID crisis, and it's probably that we won't. Plus, any natural disasters like we see right now with Hurricane ETA is going to affect everyone, even the sympathizers. Yeah. And then plus our femicide rates, that that I think just in this year we have about 50, almost 60 femicide, and that's continuing.
Yeah, yeah. And I actually, as you know, I reached out to you because of Hurricane Eta
Yeah.
and some of the news that you were sharing on Twitter about how, you know, the government is not really, they're not just, not only are they not helping Eta victims, but they're also not letting others help them. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So with Hurricane Eta, it affected what we call in Nicaragua. We have, if you see the map of Nicaragua, it's kind of it's divided into two. So we have our Caribbean coast and we have the Pacific coast, right? And our Caribbean coast is practically makes up a lot of our biodiversity and all that. So it's a big coast. So, and it's cut into two. So it affected the North Caribbean coast. So mostly like in places like Puerto Cabeza, and it's all in the map. You can see it in the map. The thing is that for most people, we already knew that the Hurricane Eta was going to hit the Caribbean coast. For majority of the people, we already knew the repercussion that was going to happen. The Caribbean coast in the history of Nicaragua has always been the one that suffered the most during the war. They're the first ones who, you know, who we don't hear about when it comes to the killings back in the past, correct? And I haven't mentioned, and they've always been organizing. So for us, we already knew the damage that was going to be done, right? And majority of these people living in these villages, you know, they have what you call like, son unas casitas, you know, just lo de encima y unas 4 paredes y ya, right? And there's nothing. So with the wind, like the Hurricane Eta, the majority of these were going to be blown off, and that's what we see. What was happening was that the biggest issue that we saw was that several indigenous and and they didn't want to leave their homes because they were afraid of the colones and invaders, that once all of this was done, once Hurricane Eta passes, that they were going to keep their land. And that was the biggest worry from a lot of these communities. So on top of that, they left to be in albergues, to be in shelters, you know, leaving whatever they have. And then if they're going to return back, it's probably going to be already taken away by some colon. Yeah. So then they're going to have to replace themselves somewhere else, right? So that was one of the issues. And then we still had to deal with the COVID. So you have all these people that are inside shelters under COVID. Yeah. That doesn't even exist to the Nicaraguan government, right? The COVID. So we have that. And then we had that, and then we had some people who didn't knew about the hurricane, and it was too late for them to leave. So that's kind of like what happened right now. I was reading there's about more than 5,000 that are affected, and the biggest issue that we're having now is the aid. So anything that goes to Ortega, that's obviously going to be profit off of him, right? That's only going to go to him and to his closest supporters, or they choose, right, who they're going to give it to. So everything has been done clandestinely in the sense that everything is like, everyone is literally doing it behind and at their risk. So what they're doing is mutual aid groups are sending money to people that they know, and that person or that group is collecting all the donations, buying the donations, and then they have to travel in a clandestine manner to the coast. So it all depends where you are. Some of these places it takes about 12 hours to get, plus you have to get in a lancha, in a canoe, to give them the aid. So that's the way it's kind of going about. I know that it's very confusing for some people, because I've been asked like, oh, but are there any places in LA that I could go and pack clothes or leave clothes? And I'm like, no, because the problem is that we have a foreign aid law. So that foreign aid law is, Ortega just implemented it, actually. So that a foreign aid law, what it does, it literally, it literally doesn't let foreign aid go inside Nicaragua. So, all those small organization groups, like the ones that deal with violence of women, they can't receive aid. So the way that they could receive aid, if unless we send it, right? Mutual aid groups send it to them. So a lot of these, the stuff that I have been sharing, they're reliable. They are mutual aid. The thing is, a lot of people don't want to give it to mutual aid sometimes, because these mutual aid groups, you have to send it to their bank account specifically, right? And some people are like, oh, but I don't want to share my information. Are there other ways? There are two 501c3s that I could vouch for, which is Corner of Love, that do amazing work with the migrant community, with the Nicaraguan and Venezuelan migrant community in Costa Rica. They do amazing work. And then the other one that's a 501c3 will be ANF, so the American Nicaraguan Foundation. So those are two options that I know that work in the 501c3 form. You also have those options of the mutual aid groups where you directly send money to the bank, and then they go and they get it and they do the things, right? And then you have what else do you have? Oh, and then I know I've shared the way that the diaspora works in here, in anywhere really, is that they just send it to who they know. So what you see right now is you see a lot of like opposition groups, or not opposition groups, but I want to say social movement groups against Ortega, like youth groups, youth groups and stuff like that are like, for example, I know this one lady that she receives her money through her Zelle account. You send it to her Zelle, and then she sends it to a student movement in Nicaragua, and then they're the ones who purchase. So there are different ways. It's very informal, and I know some people are very hesitant, but it's because of the certain situation that we're given, right? The problem is that we cannot send $10,000 to Nicaragua in just like that, right? We have to send it to people who we trust. We have to figure out the logistics. We have to figure out how, what's the safest way to get there. These people are also at risk because Ortega is literally not helping, and the people who are giving the aid are the ones who are mostly vocal about Ortega. So their lives is at risk too, right? And the thing is that we can't, like, let's say if we would send boxes to Nicaragua, that almost seems impossible because it might not even pass through La Aduana, right? It might not pass through migration. It might just keep it. So those are the things that we have to do. Some people are very confused, like, well, I don't want to send money. What are my other options? I'm like, there's really no other options but sending money to these mutual aid groups, or like I mentioned, that 501c3, or like I mentioned, if you're already Nicaraguan and you know somebody in your city or town, you can send money to them, because what's happening also is that churches are organizing and receiving aid, and they're sending it over. So people are kind of just dropping it off at places like their nearby church. But like I said, I think a lot of the movement is being done inside the capital because it's really hard to get to the coast, especially right now since everything's destroyed. So I think a lot of the movement is done within the capital, and because even from the capital, it's about 12 hours to get there.
Okay, so I know it is a lot for everyone.
It's a lot. It's super
but
confusing.
This is the only,
and like I've been having a hard time like explaining it to people. Like, no, I'm sorry, there's no donation like drop off. I wish there was, but there isn't. And I see my Honduran community and I see all the other communities coming by, and it's super like awesome that they're doing that. But for Nicaragua, it's like it's not like that, guys. And it's super hard, like, for me to explain. Like, I don't know how else to explain it if it just kind of just gives me a headache myself. Like, how do I send it to people? Like, and sometimes I don't want to make it political because I'm not trying to, right? I don't want to make it like a political thing. But at the end of the day, it's like, we're dealing with this political crisis, and when you're dealing with the political crisis, there's really no other way around it.
And this is the only way you can protect the people that are getting this aid and protect the aid itself to get there, because if not, like you said, it's very likely that if you send packages, they're probably never going to get to people. And that's also what happens in Venezuela with aid. I mean, we've seen like entire like trucks of aid getting burned to the ground because they rather do them than getting to the people. And so I think, you know, you put it very, I know it's a complicated situation, but you put it very well, and like that's what it has to be done, and that's how we need to help the Nicaraguan people. It has to be through these ways, because there's literally no other way. And so thank you so much for coming here and for your time, and trying to explain something that is not, you know, just a couple of months or years. It's like decades of history and work and just crazy political like situations that have arisen as a result of such a violent regime as Daniel Ortega's is. So I really appreciate, you know, you coming here and trying to explain that to our audience. And so I would love for you to send me all this info on how to send money and send help, so I can put it in the caption, because this video will live in our page. So thank you again.
No, of course. I will go ahead and put everything that I have, like mutual aid groups, and then for sure I'll send you the stuff, at least for, you know, for the 501c3 because I think that's where people are gonna most likely go that route for safety reasons, and I understand why. Like, I completely get it. But for I'll send it that way.
Yeah. So hopefully we can get some aid in, however we can, even if, you know, as informal and as whatever it is, that's how it has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be trying my best to share more mutual aid. That's if people are more comfortable in sending it to a Zelle account that I could vouch for. I don't want to put pressure on people like, yeah, send it to the Zelle. No, if people want to join, you know, I completely understand. But if people were a little bit more like comfortable, then they could always DM me, and I could always share like a Zelle account that I could vouch for. But definitely these 501c3 forms that I just mentioned, they're reliable. I've worked with them before, so.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anaís. Again,
thank you so much. Thank you.
A really good conversation and much needed.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye. Have a good one.
Bye. Have a good one.